Have you ever felt like the more you push for things to happen, the more life seems to resist? This feeling of swimming against the tide is familiar. You strive, plan, and execute, but the results always seem distant or unsatisfactory. What you really want is to feel the peace of being aligned with life, where doors open more easily. In this video, we'll explore Alan Watts's most powerful lesson on the surrender paradox and discover why letting go isn't giving up, but rather the smartest move you can make. This experience, this friction with reality, is perhaps the most universal and silent of human pains. It's the student who, on the eve of an exam, desperately tries to force concentration, feeling a cold sweat on his forehead as the words in the book turn into an indecipherable blur, his mind a whirlwind of panic that drives him further away from the knowledge he seeks. It's the artist who, obsessed with creating a masterpiece, stares at the blank canvas for hours, paralyzed by his own ambition, while inspiration, which once flowed freely like a river, now seems like a dry and dusty spring. It's the entrepreneur who micromanages every detail of a project, trying to anticipate and control every variable, only to see his plan crumble at the first unforeseen event, the first manifestation of life's uncontrollable nature. In all these scenarios, the equation seems simple and logical, a lesson drummed into us since childhood. Greater effort should lead to greater results. Yet reality presents us with a perplexing conundrum. In certain crucial dimensions of existence, excessive effort not only fails to produce the desired result, it actively sabotages it, turning our endeavor into our own obstacle. Alan Watts, with his cutting clarity and philosophical smile, called this the law of inverse effort, or, as he preferred, the inverted law. It's a principle that operates in the shadows of our consciousness, contradicting everything our culture of productivity and control has taught us. The law states simply, the more you deliberately try to achieve something that depends on spontaneity, the further it slips away from you. Try to be happy, and you become painfully aware of your own unhappiness, creating a cycle of self-evaluation that poisons any genuine joy that might otherwise arise. Try to force someone to love you, and you become needy and manipulative, your anxiety radiating in every gesture, repelling the very affection you so desperately seek. Try to sleep, and the very awareness of the act of trying will keep your mind on high alert, turning your bed into a self-imposed torture field. This sabotage isn't a flaw in the universe, it's a fundamental feature of our design. But why does this happen? Why does our will, the tool we use to build cities and unlock the secrets of the atom, become so impotent, even destructive, when directed at our own inner universe? The answer, from Watts's perspective, lies not in a failure of our willpower, but in a fundamental misperception of who we are and what our relationship to the world is. The problem begins with the most powerful and dangerous of illusions, the cornerstone of Western civilization, encapsulated in Descartes' "I think, therefore I am." The idea that you are a separate I, an ego, a pilot, a ghost in the machine, distinct and separate from the rest of existence. This I, which we believe to be our essence, is actually a concept, a mental construct. This entity, this I we believe ourselves to be, feels like a stranger in an indifferent, even hostile universe. From this sense of separation, the imperative of control is born. If I am here and the world is out there, then it is up to me to impose my will upon it, bend it to my desires, protect it from its threats, and extract my security and happiness from it. Life becomes a battle, a strategic game between the I and the other. It is on this imaginary battlefield that resistance is born. When you try to force an outcome, you are, in effect, declaring war on the way things are. You are saying to the river of life, you should flow north, not east. The river, being what it is, simply continues flowing east. And all your energy is expended in a futile struggle against the current, a struggle that only breeds exhaustion, frustration, and the feeling of being defeated. the psychological cost of this war is immense, draining our vitality and leaving us bitter about a life that never seems to cooperate. Consider water, a favorite metaphor of Watts and the Taoist philosophers who so influenced him. Water is the softest, most flexible substance, yet it can wear away the hardest rock. Its power comes not from its rigidity, but from its ability to yield and adapt. It doesn't fight, it bends. It doesn't force, it flows, filling every available space. If you try to grasp water with a closed fist, it will slip through your fingers. The more force you apply, the faster you lose it. To hold water, you need to open your hand like a cup, relax, and allow it to rest there. Your hand becomes a container, not a prison. The act of letting go is exactly that. It's stopping your fist and opening your hand. It's not an act of surrender or passivity, but of profound wisdom. It's recognizing that life, like water, cannot be possessed or controlled by brute force. It can only be experienced when we become a receptive vessel for it, when we understand that true strength lies in flexibility. This constant struggle, this chronic resistance, is the ego's signature. The ego thrives on control, prediction, and categorization. It needs to know what's coming next. It needs to feel in control, because its very existence depends on this illusion. Spontaneity terrifies it. The unknown offends it. So it builds rigid plans, inflexible expectations, and clings to specific outcomes as if its life depended on it. And, from the ego's perspective, it does. Because the moment you truly let go, the moment you trust the flow, the ego begins to lose its power. It realizes that perhaps it is not the king of the castle, but merely the loud, anxious court jester who thinks its shouts and decrees are somehow ruling the kingdom, unaware that the kingdom has its own innate intelligence. The tragedy, as the perennial philosophy Watts so brilliantly translated for the West points out, is that we live most of our lives like this court jester. We believe our anxiety is productive, that our worry is a form of care, that our obsessive control is a mark of responsibility. But what if this is all a vast misunderstanding? What if true responsibility lies in learning to dance to the music of life, rather than trying to conduct the orchestra from the audience? What would happen if we discovered that the universe is not against us, but that our own resistance is the only force antagonizing us? This is the door the surrender paradox invites us to open. A door that leads from a life of exhausting effort to one of effective action, from a life of anxious control to one of radical trust. But if our minds have been programmed by a lifetime of conditioning to fight and control, how, in practice, do we learn to trust this flow? How do we silence the inner tyrant that screams for certainty and guarantees in a universe that offers none? The answer to this question lies not in a new strategy of control, but in a completely different way of relating to our own experience, one that invites us to explore the theater of our everyday lives in a new light. Alan Watts's great philosophy lies not in distant abstractions, but in its direct application to the fabric of our daily lives, to the drama and comedy we enact in our relationships, careers, and even in our quiet moments. The law of reversed effort is not an esoteric concept. It is a pattern that relentlessly repeats itself in the theater of our daily lives, often so subtly that we fail to recognize it. To unravel this trap, we need to become detectives of our own experience, observing where and how our desire for control manifests itself and invariably sabotages us. Consider the scenario of love and relationships, perhaps the most vulnerable arena in human experience. We're familiar with the anxious lover. Driven by a deep fear of loneliness or rejection, they try to build a fortress around the relationship. They need constant reassurance, daily validation. They monitor, question, and plan the couple's future with military precision. Every small deviation from their ideal script is seen as an existential threat. In their mind, they're protecting love, nurturing it with their vigilance. However, what they're really doing is suffocating it. Love, to flourish, needs air, spontaneity, and trust. By trying to hold on so tightly, the anxious lover turns the relationship into a cage. The other person, feeling the weight of control and distrust, begins to pull away, seeking the breathing space they've been denied. And so, the primal fear that gave rise to all this effort, the fear of being alone, becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. By desperately fighting to avoid losing the person he loves, he ensures that loss. He is the living embodiment of the law of reverse effort. He tried to hold the water with his closed fist, and it inevitably escaped. Now, let's apply this analysis to the workplace. Consider the team leader who fundamentally distrusts process and people. They don't truly delegate. They distribute tasks and then micromanage them to exhaustion. They demand constant reports, hover over their employees, and correct every little detail, stifling any glimmer of autonomy or creativity. Their stated goal is excellence and error prevention. They believe their rigorous control is what guarantees quality. However, the result is the opposite. The team becomes passive, unmotivated, and afraid to take any initiative. Creativity dies, replaced by robotic conformity. People stop thinking for themselves, having learned that their judgment will always be questioned. The leader, by trying to prevent error, creates a system perfectly designed to breed mediocrity and resentment. Their drive to ensure success creates the exact conditions for the failure of engagement and innovation. He's trying to force the plant to grow by pulling on its leaves, instead of simply providing soil, water, and sunlight, and trusting the process of life. His pursuit of perfection creates a sterile environment where nothing new can flourish. Another stage for this drama is parenthood. The father or mother, driven by the deepest love, tries to pave their child's path, removing every obstacle, planning every activity, shielding them from every frustration. They control friendships, grades, free time, all in the name of ensuring a bright and secure future. But in doing so, they rob their child of the most essential tools for life: resilience, problem-solving ability, and confidence in their own judgment. The overprotected child becomes an anxious adult, unable to cope with life's inevitable disorder. The parent's efforts to eliminate suffering ultimately create a deeper form of fragility, proving once again that excessive control, even when well-intentioned, produces the opposite of the desired result. The attempt to build a perfect world for the child leaves them unprepared for the real world. But the most intimate and perhaps most universal example is that of the insomniac. Alan Watts loved to use this image because it is the purest and most undeniable demonstration of the paradox. Lying in bed, in the silence of the night, the insomniac's mind is a battlefield. He knows he needs sleep, that the next day will demand his energy. And so, he begins to try. He tries to relax, which is a contradiction in terms. He tries to empty his mind, which fills it with the thought, "I'm trying to empty my mind." Every sound in the house becomes a personal affront. Every minute that passes on the clock is a hammer blow to his anxiety. The very urgency to sleep is what keeps him awake. Sleep is an act of surrender, a trusting plunge into the unconscious. It cannot be conquered. It can only be allowed. Peace only comes the moment the insomniac, exhausted from fighting, finally gives up. The moment he tells himself, "Okay, I'm not going to sleep tonight." The moment he lets go of the need to control the outcome, the body, finally free from the tyranny of the mind, relaxes and drifts off to sleep. What do these four scenarios, the lover, the leader, the father, and the insomniac, have in common? They reveal that our fundamental problem isn't in the external event. It's not the relationship, the project, the child, or the night. The problem is our internal approach, our belief that life is a problem to be solved by force of will. In each case, the individual confuses the map with the territory. They have a plan, an expectation, a map of how things should be, and they try to force the unpredictable and fluid territory of reality to conform to it. Our suffering arises not from the event itself, but from the friction between our rigid map and the fluidity of the territory. The real turning point The element of mystery we need to unravel is the realization that the solution isn't finding a better map or applying more force. The solution is learning to navigate without a fixed map, using intuition, presence, and adaptability as our compass. This is the great revelation. The prison is not the world. The prison is our mind and its insatiable thirst for control. We live as if we were the puppet master, frantically pulling the strings, believing we are in charge of the show, without realizing that we are just another puppet on stage, and the strings that bind us are our own expectations. Letting go doesn't mean cutting the strings and falling inert. It means becoming aware of the strings, understanding their nature, and then learning to dance with them, transforming them from chains into instruments of freer and more authentic expression. Ask yourself now, what is your most rigid map? In what area of your life are you most indignant because the territory doesn't conform to your plan? We understand the trap in our daily lives. We see how it manifests and sabotages us. But what is the psychological root of this need for control? What, deep within our psyche, in the layers that casual conversation dare not touch, makes us so fundamentally averse to the idea of surrender? To answer this, we need to go beyond Watts for a moment and delve into the darker waters of depth psychology, where the true nature of our fear is revealed. If the law of reverse effort is the symptom, the need for control is the disease. But what is the pathogen, the invisible agent that infects our psyche and turns us into tyrants of our own lives? Alan Watts, with his focus on Eastern philosophy, gave us the map of the territory. But to understand the deeper geology, the tectonic forces that shape this terrain, we can turn to explorers of the Western psyche, such as Carl Jung, and existential philosophers, such as Nietzsche. This is where the analysis becomes more sober, more investigative, for we are approaching the root of our fear, the hidden engine behind all our resistance. The first and deepest layer of this fear is the dread of emptiness, the existential horror of nothingness. The ego, this identity construct we call I, is not a solid entity. It is a process, a set of memories, beliefs, and sensations that cling to one another to create an illusion of permanence. Like a whirlpool in a river, it only exists while it is in motion, while it is processing, thinking, controlling. The act of letting go, of surrendering to the flow, is perceived by the ego as a threat of dissolution. If I am not in control, if I am not actively doing something, who am I? Silence, stillness, not knowing. All of this is the equivalent of death for the ego structure. It needs the noise of struggle to know it is alive. Therefore, resistance to life is not just a bad habit, it is a desperate defense mechanism against the perception of our own emptiness and impermanence. We fight against the current because the sound of the struggle drowns out the terrifying silence of the ocean into which every river flows. The ocean of impersonal consciousness. Nietzsche would speak of the fear of the abyss. He said that when we gaze into an abyss for too long, the abyss also gazes into us. Control is the guardrail we build at the edge of this precipice. We believe that if we plan every step, if we hold firmly to what is known and predictable, we will never risk falling. But, paradoxically, it is this very guardrail that prevents us from learning to fly. Real life, the life with vitality and power that Nietzsche called will to power, happens in the space of the unknown, in the leap of faith. By refusing to let go, we are refusing to truly live, opting for a security that is, in fact, a form of death in life. Could it be that your obsessive control over the trivial details of your life, planning your week, organizing your home, managing your finances, isn't, at its core, a desperate attempt to avoid looking into the great uncontrollable abyss of your own mortality and the inherent meaninglessness of the universe? Here, Carl Jung's perspective becomes indispensable. For Jung, what we do not bring to consciousness appears in our lives as destiny. Our compulsion for external control is often a direct reflection of our refusal to confront our internal chaos. Jung called this denied dimension the shadow. The shadow contains all the impulses, desires, fears, and weaknesses that our conscious ego rejects to maintain an acceptable and civilized self-image. We consider ourselves good, rational, and controlled people, and therefore we banish our anger, envy, fear, and irrationality to the basement of the psyche. However, these energies do not disappear. They project themselves outward. A man who cannot accept his own aggression becomes paranoid, seeing threats everywhere and trying to control the world to feel safe. A woman who does not admit her own vulnerability tries to control her relationships, so as not to be caught off guard by the pain of loss. A person obsessed with the laziness of others is likely repressing their own desperate desire for rest. The struggle against the flow of life is, therefore, a struggle against ourselves. We resist situations that threaten to expose our shadow. A failed project can expose our incompetence. A relationship that ends can expose our dependency. A criticism can expose our insecurity. Instead of turning inward and integrating these uncomfortable truths, we turn outward and redouble our efforts to control our circumstances. Surrender, in this context, takes on a much deeper meaning. Surrendering is not just accepting the external flow. It is accepting our own internal flow. It is having the courage to look at the shadow and recognize that it is also part of us. It is an act of integration, of wholeness, what Jung called individuation. It is a dangerous path, for it forces us to face what we fear most within ourselves. Alan Watts reached the same conclusion from a different perspective. He described the thinking mind, our internal computer, as a magnificent but limited tool. It excels at calculating, analyzing, and planning, at dealing with what is fixed and known. But it is woefully inadequate for dealing with life itself, which is fluid, ambiguous, and fundamentally mysterious. Trying to live life entirely through rational thought is, as Watts said, like trying to flatten the waves on a lake with an iron. The very act of trying to fix the problem with the wrong tool only creates more disruption. The analytical mind wants answers, certainties, a 5-step plan to enlightenment. But life doesn't offer these. Life offers only the present moment, with all its complexity and uncertainty. Our obsession with control is the mind's obsession with trying to translate the poetry of reality into the dry, limited prose of logic. It wants to transform dance into a march, music into an equation, and in doing so, she loses the essence of it all. The new perspective that emerges is this: our most celebrated tool, the intellect, is the source of our imprisonment when used outside its domain. And our deepest fear, the fear of emptiness and our own shadow, is what keeps us chained to this tool. We then face a nearly impossible dilemma. To free ourselves, we must let go of control. But to let go of control, we must face the fears that drove us to seek it in the first place. It seems like a dead end. If the mind is the source of the problem, and surrender feels like a death to the ego and a terrifying encounter with our own shadow, is there a map? Have there been cultures or individuals who have mastered this art of navigating life with a different compass? And what surprising secrets have they discovered in the process? The answer is yes, and their discoveries offer concrete proof that there is, indeed, another path. One that does not deny fear, but learns to walk through it. The idea of surrendering to the flow of life may sound poetic, but dangerously passive to the Western mind, trained for action and achievement. If I just let go, asks the skeptic in us, won't I be crushed by circumstances? Isn't that just an excuse for inaction and failure? To answer this objection, we need to move beyond theory and into the realm of evidence. History, modern psychology, and even the biographies of notable individuals offer us startling proof that surrender is not passivity, but a higher form of effectiveness, an intelligence that operates at a much deeper level than mere egoic planning. Let's begin with the wisdom encapsulated in an ancient Taoist story, one Alan Watts loved to tell. There was an old farmer in a Chinese village. One day, his only horse, his most prized possession, ran away. His neighbors came to console him, saying, "What terrible bad luck!" The farmer simply replied, "Perhaps." A few days later, the horse returned, bringing with it a herd of wild horses. The jubilant neighbors came to congratulate him. "What incredible good luck!" The farmer, unmoved, said, "Perhaps." The next day, the farmer's son, while trying to tame one of the wild horses, fell and broke his leg. Again, the neighbors came to lament. "What a misfortune! Your only son, now useless for work." The farmer replied, "Perhaps." Weeks later, the emperor's army marched through the village, forcibly conscripting all the able-bodied young men for a distant and bloody war. The farmer's son, with his broken leg, was the only one spared. This story is not an apology for indifference. It is a masterful lesson in the arrogance of our minds in judging events. We operate with an absurdly limited set of data. We see a tiny fragment of the vast fabric of time and space and hastily label it as good or bad. The farmer represents a broader consciousness. He does not resist what happens, nor does he cling to a specific outcome. He let go of his judgment and remains open to the unfolding process. His peace comes not from controlling events, but from letting go of the need to interpret them according to his limited plans. This is surrender in action, not the absence of response, but the absence of internal resistance to what is. He does not fight reality. He dances with it, recognizing that life has its own logic, far greater than his own. But perhaps this seems like ancient folklore. What about modern science? Here, we find one of the most fascinating confirmations of Watts's philosophy in the work of psychologist Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi and his concept of flow state. Csikszentmihalyi spent decades studying elite athletes, surgeons, artists, musicians, and scientists, people operating at the peak of their powers. He discovered a common thread. Their best performances occurred not through conscious forced effort, but in a state where the self seemed to disappear. They described a sense of merging with the activity, where actions flowed effortlessly, where time became distorted, and where there was no room for self-criticism or doubt. The ego, with its constant chatter and need for control, simply fell silent. Neurologically, what happens is transient hypofrontality, a decrease in activity in the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for our sense of self, long-term planning, and self-criticism. In other words, to reach our full potential, the controller in our heads needs to take a break. What is flow, if not the exact scientific description of what the Taoists call wu wei, and what Watts describes as letting go? It is proof that peak performance comes not from trying harder, but from entering a state of surrender to the task, trusting the process, and releasing the ego's control. The surfer who becomes one with the wave, the programmer who loses himself in the code, the pianist whose fingers seem to move of their own accord, they all demonstrate that the greatest human effectiveness is achieved when we stop trying to be effective and simply become the act itself. The consciousness and body are so immersed in the present moment that resistance disappears, and action becomes perfectly attuned to the need of the moment. Reverse effort is, therefore, not a mystical fantasy. It is a fundamental principle of peak psychology, proof that a relaxed and focused mind overcomes a tense and controlling one. Let's look at an example from the world of creativity. Paul McCartney recounted that the complete melody of Yesterday, one of the most covered songs in history, came to him in a dream. He woke up, ran to the piano, and played it so he wouldn't forget. He spent weeks asking other people in the music industry if they had ever heard that melody before, unable to believe that something so perfect could have simply come to him. He didn't create it through effort and struggle. He was a vessel. He was relaxed, asleep, in a state of total surrender, and inspiration flowed through him. Stories like this are common among great artists. They don't feel like the authors of their greatest works, but rather like the conduits. This is only possible when the controlling ego gets out of the way. Still skeptical? Let's look at the business world, the bastion of strategic planning and control. The story of Soichiro Honda, the founder of the Honda Motor Company, is an unlikely and powerful example. During World War II, His factory was bombed twice. He rebuilt. An earthquake destroyed it again. Instead of giving up, he began making makeshift motorized bicycles in a small hut, using surplus generator motors. He couldn't get gasoline due to post-war rationing. Instead of fighting this reality, he surrendered to it and had a brilliant idea. Write to 18,000 bicycle shops in Japan, describing his vision and asking for a small investment. About 5,000 responded, giving him the capital to build his first real motorcycle, the dream. Honda's story is not one of a perfectly executed linear plan. It is a story of disaster, adaptation, and creative surrender. Honda didn't control circumstances, but he surrendered to each new disaster and found the opportunity within. He didn't fight the river. He used the force of the current to propel him in a direction he could never have planned. His genius lay not in predicting the future, but in his ability to harmonize with the present. These examples, from the Taoist farmer to the modern psychologist, from the genius musician to the industrial magnate, converge on a single, powerful truth. Reality is far more intelligent, complex, and creative than any individual mind. Our attempt to impose our own little scripts on the grand scheme of the universe is not only arrogant, it is inefficient. True intelligence is not the ability to force the world to conform to our plans, but the ability to abandon our plans when they no longer serve and dance with reality as it presents itself. We've seen the theory, the examples, and the evidence. Now, the question becomes intensely personal and practical. If this principle is so powerful, how do we begin to dismantle the ego fortress we've built over a lifetime? Brick by brick. What are the first, and perhaps the most difficult and uncomfortable steps we can take to begin cultivating the subtle and powerful art of surrender in our own lives? We now enter the heart of the paradox. Recognizing the wisdom of surrender is one thing. Practicing it is quite another. The ego does not yield its throne easily. The fortress of control, built over decades of conditioning, fear, and habit, is deeply entrenched in our neurology. Dismantling it is not an act of violence, not a declared war against ourselves, for that would be just another form of effort and resistance. It is a process more akin to archaeology. It is a patient work of excavation, of carefully removing layers of dust and debris to reveal the truth that was always there, buried beneath the structure we ourselves built. It requires courage, patience, and, above all, self-compassion. The first and most fundamental step, the essential tool of any archaeologist of the psyche, is the practice of detached observation. This is the essence of meditation and mindfulness, stripped of any mystical connotation and presented as a psychological skill. Alan Watts insisted on this point. You are not your thoughts, just as you are not the clouds passing through the sky. You are the sky. You are the consciousness in which thoughts, emotions, and sensations appear and disappear. Our primary confusion is that we completely identify with every thought that arises. An anxious thought appears, and we say, I am anxious. An angry thought arises, and we say, I am angry. We become the content of our mind, rather than remaining the context, the space that contains everything. The practice, then, is simple, but not easy. It involves sitting for a few minutes every day and simply observing the flow of your mind without interfering. Observe your thoughts as if they were cars passing by on a street. You don't try to stop them, you don't jump in front of them, you don't criticize them for their color or speed. You simply sit on the curb and observe. At first, this will seem impossible. The mind, accustomed to being in control, will rebel. It will drag you into traffic again and again. But each time you realize you've been led astray and gently return to your position of observer, you will be weakening the power of the habit. A helpful technique is to name what arises. Planning, worry, judgment. The act of naming creates a subtle separation. Each moment of detached observation is a chisel blow to the ego's fortress. You are creating, for the first time, a space between the observer and the observed. And in that space, freedom is born. In this space, You begin to realize that the tyrant screaming for control isn't you. It's just a thought, and a thought you can choose not to follow. With the tool of observation in hand, we can move on to excavating a deeper and more frightening layer: our relationship with impermanence. The struggle for control is, at its core, a struggle against change. We want the good times to last forever, and the bad times to never arrive. We cling to people, to status, to identities, as if they were solid rocks in a changing world. But the fundamental nature of reality, as Eastern philosophy and quantum physics itself teach us, is flux. Everything is in a constant state of becoming and ceasing to be. Your body, your cells, your thoughts. Nothing is the same from one moment to the next. Our resistance to this truth is the source of immense suffering. It's like trying to build a sandcastle and being furious with the tide for doing what tides do. The practice here is to consciously embrace impermanence. Start with small things. When savoring a cup of coffee, recognize that that flavor, that temperature, that moment will never be repeated exactly the same way again. When saying goodbye to a loved one in the morning, allow yourself to feel the preciousness of that moment, knowing that it is fleeting. Embrace both the praise and the grief, knowing that you are both temporary visitors. This is not meant to be morbid. It is meant to be intensely alive. Blind attachment to the past or anxiety about the future rob us of the vitality of the only moment that truly exists: the now. Surrendering to impermanence does not make us apathetic. It makes us present. It transforms life from a series of possessions to be defended into a series of moments to be experienced. The tension here increases because to truly accept impermanence, we must face its ultimate expression, our own mortality. The denial of death is perhaps the most powerful driver behind the ego's quest for control. Leaving a legacy, building an empire, controlling our image, these are all attempts to become solid and permanent in a universe that doesn't allow such things. Surrendering to life ultimately means surrendering to death, not with despair, but with the same trust with which a seed surrenders to the earth to become a tree. Amidst these mental and philosophical practices, we risk losing ourselves again in abstraction. We need an anchor, and the most powerful anchor we have is always with us: our body. The mind constantly travels to the past, ruminating, regretting, or to the future, planning, worrying. The body, however, can only exist in the present. It is always here, now. The sensation of your breath coming in and out, the contact of your feet with the ground, the sound of your heart. These are the gateways to the present moment, the only place where surrender can happen. The body is our barometer of truth. It doesn't lie. The tension in your neck, the knot in your stomach, the tightness in your chest, these are the physical signs of resistance. When you feel lost in the storm of control and anxiety, the most practical instruction is: come back to your body. Stop what you're doing and take 3 deep breaths. Feel the air filling your lungs and then releasing. Feel gravity pulling your body downward. Listen to the sounds around you without judging them. Place your hand over your heart and feel its beating. This simple shift in focus from the mind to bodily sensations is a revolutionary act. It short-circuits the ego's panic mechanism. It's a reminder that beneath all the complexity of our thoughts lies a simplicity and calm that are always accessible. The revelation, the great turning point in this journey, is that letting go is not a single cataclysmic event. It's not an enlightenment that happens once and for all. It's an ongoing practice, a choice renewed moment by moment. It's the lifelong work of noticing the ego's contraction and choosing, repeatedly, to relax and let go. The tension lies precisely there. There is no final destination where the struggle ceases forever. There's just the constant dance between control and surrender, and our growing ability to choose surrender more often and with more grace. And this ability is cultivated with a generous dose of self-compassion. forgiving yourself for the times you inevitably return to clench your fist. We understand the what and the why. We glimpse the how. But what is the ultimate transformation? What actually happens on the other side of surrender? And how can we take this philosophy from the clouds of theory to the hard, real ground of our daily lives in a way that permanently alters the quality of our existence? We have reached the end of our exploration, but in truth, we are only at the beginning of the real journey. For the intellectual understanding of the surrender paradox is only the map. True transformation happens when we dare to take the first step into the unknown territory of our own experience. What we discover on the other side is not what the ego feared. We do not find chaos, annihilation, or failure. We find something much more subtle, profound, and revolutionary. We find a peace that is independent of circumstances, an inner stability that is unshaken by the inevitable ebb and flow of life. The great resolution of the paradox is this: by letting go of the need to get what you want, you don't necessarily get it the way your mind imagined. Instead, you discover a much greater freedom, the freedom to be happy and fulfilled, whether you get it or not. Life doesn't begin handing you the items on your wish list like a cosmic catalog. It hands you something infinitely more valuable. It hands you the present moment. And in the present moment, stripped of anxiety about the future and the weight of the past, we discover that, most of the time, everything is already fine. The desperate need for more dissolves, not because we become passive, but because we become present. The abundance life delivers is not an abundance of things, but an abundance of being. It's the difference between having $1 million and feeling poor, and having little and feeling immensely rich. The first is an external condition. The second is a state of consciousness. Alan Watts used the most beautiful of metaphors to describe this new way of living: life as a dance, or a piece of music. When you listen to a symphony, you don't rush to the end to hear the last note. The purpose of music is in every measure, in every melody, in every silence. If the goal were only the ending, composers would write only the final chord. Similarly, when you dance, you're not trying to reach a specific point on the dance floor. The purpose of dance is the dance itself, the movement, the flow, the expression of the moment. Our culture, however, has taught us to treat life not as music or dance, but as a journey. A journey has a destination, a point of arrival. And so, we spend our entire lives rushing toward that destination: graduation, marriage, promotion, retirement, always feeling like we're not there yet. We live in a state of perpetual arrival, as Watts put it, and therefore, we're never truly where we are. Embracing surrender is changing the fundamental metaphor of your life. It's stopping treating it as a journey and starting to live it as a dance. It's finding purpose, not in a distant future, but in the quality of your attention as you give it now. Joy isn't in the destination. It's in the journey itself, when the journey stops being a race and becomes a conscious stroll. From this understanding, action doesn't cease. On the contrary, it becomes more authentic and powerful. Your actions are no longer motivated by fear of lack or anxiety about proving your worth. They arise from fulfillment, inspiration, and a creative response to the present moment. You act not to get somewhere, but because the action itself is an expression of your vitality. You work not just for the paycheck, but for the pleasure of the craft. You love not to guarantee companionship, but for the beauty of connecting with another being. Life transforms from a problem to be solved into a mystery, to be lived. So, how do you bring this philosophy from the clouds to the ground? How do you start dancing today? The journey isn't a giant leap, but a series of small, conscious steps that, over time, change the direction of your life. First, start practicing surrender on a small scale. Traffic is at a standstill. Your flight is delayed. Someone canceled an appointment. These small frustrations are the perfect training ground. Instead of the automatic reaction of anger and resistance, try, for a moment, to relax. Take a deep breath and accept the reality of the situation as it is. You don't have to like it. But you can stop fighting it in your mind. Notice the tension in your body and consciously release it. Every small victory over reactivity strengthens the muscle of acceptance. Second, create a not-doing ritual. In our hyperproductive world, this sounds like heresy, but set aside 5 or 10 minutes of your day to do absolutely nothing. Sit in a chair without your phone, book, or music. Don't try to meditate or achieve a special state. Just be there. The goal is to familiarize yourself with stillness and observe the discomfort it generates. It's an exercise to teach your nervous system that you don't need to be constantly doing to be safe and alive. Third, keep a resistance journal. At the end of the day, briefly note 1 or 2 moments when you felt yourself struggling, pushing, or resisting life. What was happening? What were you afraid of? What was the outcome you were trying to control? Just naming and acknowledging the pattern diminishes its power. You begin to see the ego in action, not as you, but as a habitual mechanism. Over time, you can also begin to note what happens when you experiment, even minimally, with letting go of this resistance. Fourth, practice yes and. This is a fundamental rule of improvisational theater. Instead of denying what your scene partner offers, you accept it, yes, and build from there, and. In life, this means meeting the present moment, however unwanted, with a yes. Yes, I lost my job, and now I have the opportunity to explore a new career. Yes, I'm feeling sad, and I can give myself permission to feel that without judgment. This isn't blind optimism. It's a creative acceptance that transforms obstacles into portals. It's the step that transforms surrender from a passive state into a dynamic, adaptive force. This journey of dismantling the ego's fortress is not about becoming perfect. There will be days when old programming takes over. There will be moments of fear, contraction, and resistance. The practice of surrender includes surrendering even to your failures to surrender. There is nothing to be achieved, not even the perfect state of surrender. There is only the dance, with its graceful steps and occasional stumbles. True freedom lies in learning to embrace it all with gentle curiosity and a growing trust in the great mystery in which we are all immersed. Peace is not in the absence of problems, but in the confidence that we have the ability to dance with them. If this reflection touched something deep within you, the journey doesn't have to stop here. The beauty of this investigation is that it deepens through sharing. Leave a comment below, even anonymously, sharing a moment when you felt this resistance in your life. Your story could be the mirror someone else needs to see themselves. Like this video, so this message can reach others who, like us, are seeking a healthier and more harmonious way of living. And, if you haven't already, subscribe to Psychosophia so we can continue unraveling the great and small paradoxes of the human mind together. The dance continues.